You said it. That person is such a phony. What's the opposite of that? Well, that person is so genuine, so real. Actually, professionally, the correct word is authentic. At least I think that is. Well, we'll find out. People who are authentic are certainly more likable, seem more confident, yet at the same time don't seem conceited. What makes for an authentic person? How do you move that way, and what are the personal benefits to becoming more authentic for you and the people around you? I'm Dick Goldberg, and that's what we'll find out today from our guest, Barbara Hummel. For 12 years, she has helped people to lead more authentic, meaningful, and engaged lives by facilitating workshops through the Center for Courage and Renewal. Prior to that, Barbara was Executive Director of Madison Area Quality Improvement Network, which helped businesses and organizations basically improve their quality and systems thinking. Barbara, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
So, what are the benefits to you and to people around you if you are authentic?
I think starting with myself or oneself, there's a sense of clarity. There's a sense of kind of cleanness in terms of moving through the world in a way that allows you to be who you are. Mm-hmm. And so I think for other people, though, it creates the possibility for vulnerability. So if I'm authentic, I'm convinced that people feel like I'm a safer person to also be authentic with. So it's a matter of if I can be authentic, then I'm taking the first risk, and then it allows for something other than just a series of surface conversations that we all have them, mm-hmm. many of them in the course of our day. Many things are transactions, and so you could go to a store and you buy a tomato. It's unlikely you're going to have an authentic conversation with the clerk. There may be a moment of authenticity in that, in terms of just saying thank you, but you're not going to go that deep. But many of us have very surface conversations, extended surface conversations that, for whatever reason, both parties are choosing not to dip into that more authentic space of really sharing a little bit more about who they are and how they're feeling about the topic, or what they're learning or what they've learned.
So this allows another person to feel safer with you. But is it possible that you are genuine and authentic, and the other person doesn't want to go there?
Oh, absolutely.
And your being authentic is not even nourishing. They'd rather keep the thing on the surface. Right.
Oh, yes. And I think we've probably all had that experience too, where you some of the people talk about that as showing up. You show up and the other person doesn't. Okay. And it's pretty clear that either they're not prepared for that, they don't have the emotional bandwidth to do that, they don't have the interest or time to do that. They're in another place.
But despite all that, does being authentic make you, in general, a more likable person? More likely to draw people to you?
It's a good question. I have some resistance to that, because it's more like, well, if that's your purpose, then I wonder how that changes how you show up.
Ah.
And so a piece of that is, that may be a benefit that people say, I really know where you are. Mm-hmm. And I like that. Mm-hmm. It may be that that's a byproduct, that you're more predictable. You're more, people feel like, yeah, I know they're gonna be real with me, mm-hmm. and I value that. But I'd resist saying, I want to do that so that you like me.
Oh, I'm not saying you do it for that reason, but I would, maybe it's my own bias, but I would speculate that people who are authentic do draw more people to them as friends and maybe even associates than people who aren't.
I do think I know when I'm more vulnerable and available, it's something that, if I had a nickel for every time somebody said, I've never told anybody this, but ... and then to go ahead and to tell me something. I mean, those are humbling but gratifying moments for me. And I think it speaks to something about people saying, yeah, you feel like you're somebody that'll hold my vulnerability, my authenticity in a way that is respectful.
What is authenticity?
Well, I in preparation for this, I've been thinking about that, and I came to the conclusion that there's a smell test that's involved with this.
Cool. Yeah.
I mean, people usually have an emotional reaction to another person when they meet about, is this person for real or not? And so trying to tease that out in terms of, I think there's some common elements. So for me, it's a matter of how grounded is this person? How well do they know themselves? And then there's something beyond that self-knowledge, but that self-knowledge is pretty important in terms of they're conscious, but they're not unduly self-conscious. And so in knowing themselves, they can give space to other people so that it's not all about ego showing up unnecessarily.
What do you mean give space to other people?
We've all had experiences where you are talking with someone and you can't get a word in edgewise.
Oh, yes.
Or, they're so busy telling you their accomplishments that, you kind of walk away feeling like I'm a worm and I haven't done anything, So the space is realizing that there's an engaged moment here. There's an opportunity we have between us, and somebody who's grounded knows that this is that opportunity for that engagement. It's not just all about me.
Well, there's a lot of terms here. Grounded, I kind of know what you mean, but are you saying being present, being not thinking about yourself all the time, being...
I think knowing who you are, in terms of being confident that you're okay, that you are who you are. Nobody's perfect. There's no perfect ideal to meet other than to really look at and use the gifts that you were given when you were born. I mean, there's a lot of temperament, there's a lot of... And we're all different. That's the beauty of life, is that everybody's got a different combination of skills and qualities. And so somebody who knows that and feels relatively confident with that can almost put that aside, saying, I'm not going to work energy on who am I, but it's more like, well, okay, I'm going to bring myself to you, and now let's have a conversation. So Yeah.
Well, what's the opposite? Is it fair to say a phony, that sense of this person seems phony, is sort of the opposite?
Well, yeah. I mean, you can think about, are there, when you meet a person, given the context, there may be some pressure for, I want you to know all the things I've accomplished. I want to impress you. I want, and oftentimes it's interesting because this is where that paradox of, if I can just show up and I can be real, that may be more impressive than telling you the 65 things I've done in the last year.
Well, sure, because if you listen to someone, they're going to like you.
Right.
I mean, we're all alone. Isn't that the time when it's the most connected, when someone's totally present to you and wants to know all about you?
Yeah, I think if somebody's willing to admit kind of where they are emotionally in the moment, and there's some screening about this. As I was thinking about it, it's like, well, we also know people that are just like tell you every emotional thing they've got, and after a while you think, oh my gosh, I've got a lot of work on my hands here. So it's a matter of that filter of being present But again, not filling up that space with I want to tell you my my emotional life history.
So I'm hearing a lack of narcissism kind of goes with being authentic. It's not all about you.
No.
Even if it's... Okay, so there's this tricky line between self-revealing and self-absorption.
Right. Right.
Self-absorption doesn't go with authentic?
I don't see... Well...
Or are they nothing to do with each other?
You know, people may authentically be self-absorbed in the moment, but whether that's effective is another matter. So, you know, as I was trying to tease this together, Dick, I was thinking, you know, there's a partner of authenticity, and that's integrity. So how can I show up in a way that you can connect with me? And so there's an element of it's not just I'm going to show you everything about me, you know, and that might be authentic. I might authentically be telling you my life history, but kind of what's the purpose? And so that's where the groundedness comes in. So is how I'm feeling in the moment, is that germane to creating a stronger connection with you, in creating a way that feels like real?
So do authentic people want to connect? Is that part of authentic? I mean, what if I come up and I'm real, but connecting isn't my first priority, just being me, being genuine, being authentic?
I think that's where the smell test comes in, because I think you know, technically you may be authentic. I think when people describe another person as authentic, there's some element of I felt connected to that person. I felt as though they got me and I got them, and so there's something about that energy in that exchange. So if I just come and I say, "This is me," you know, take it or leave it. I mean that may be authentic, but you know, that feels like that's got a little more ego to it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's say one person like you. I know you, and you're a pretty authentic person. Can one person be with you who's not authentic, have an interaction, and they walk away feeling that was a really good interaction, and you walk away feeling, hey, that was not good for me? Does that happen?
It happens all the time.
You don't know for sure they think it was a great interaction. You just know it wasn't good for you.
Right.
But do you suspect they think that was pretty good?
Well, I think you know, I do a lot of coaching of executives, and I think a lot of transactions in organizational life, it's like, well, I told the story the way I think they wanted to hear it. It may not be authentic, but it may be delivered in a powerful way, and so that's some of the pain I see with people who say, you know, I can't be the kind of leader people want me to be, and they've got this image of, you know, I've got to be, you know, 20 years ago I would have said I've got to be like John Wayne, not me, but people I would hear that, and
so they mean tough and storyteller and have a lot of gravitas,
all-knowing and powerful and decisive, and you know, I've known some fabulous leaders who didn't pretend to be anything other than what they were, and they would say, you know, I need to think about that. I want to give that the time and energy it deserves, and they knew themselves. They knew that I need to mull this over, you know, for that particular person, and they could share that with whomever they were with, and the person knew it wasn't a delay tactic. It was what that person needed. And for me, I think that's gold. I mean, to say, this is who I am, this is how I can connect with you best, and there's a lot of pressure not to communicate those kinds of things, that degree of vulnerability or availability.
Talk, if you would, about humility and confidence and how those interplay in authenticity.
Well, Jim Collins had a book about level 5 leadership, and he talked about the combination of humility and chutzpah. And so
Everyone know what chutzpah means?
well,
Confidence,
yeah,
energy.
confidence, some kind of willing to address the challenge, to meet the challenge. And so he talked about personal chutzpah and yet organizational humility. So, looking at accomplishments in terms of saying, a lot of people helped me get here. That's the humility side of it. And the chutzpah is saying, I think we can do this. And so that combination of that and people actually trying to actively work it.
But I'm interested in the personal level, too. What if you're not in an organization?
Right.
You're just relating to people in some other context. Where does humility and confidence fit in?
I think that gets back to what I was trying to convey about groundedness. And so, we, in the course of our days, we have a lot of unconscious conversations. When I can be more conscious of, what am I doing here? Like, what's my purpose? Then I think those factors of humility and confidence enter in. So, I want to have a good conversation with you. If I'm prepared, if I'm ready, I can put some of the ego aside, and then I'm convinced I can handle any question you ask me. Now, I will say I did have some questions thinking like, oh gosh, I hope I'm ready for this. But,
yeah,
that's a piece of the humility is you think, well, let's see. Let's see where
let's
this
bring
goes.
it to noon today. You're going to a Rotary meeting. We're both members of a big Rotary organization. You sit down and a stranger sits down next to you, and you're having lunch together, and you have 25 minutes to chat. And he's in the cement business. What's going to be your goal? How are you going to be authentic and get the most out of that conversation, or bring whatever it is to it that fits with what you're saying?
I think a couple of things. One would be, what do I choose to tell him about or her about me? What feels germane to, the situation at hand? It's essentially a social connection. Okay,
but let's say it begins. He says, so what do you do? And you say, what would you say?
Say, I have my own consulting practice. I do a lot of retreats and work in the area of leadership and collaboration.
Okay. And then you ask him, and he tells you about his cement business, and he never asks you another question about what you do. What's your goal then in that conversation? How are you going to be authentic?
I think, this is where it all depends to me, Dick. And I think one of it is he interested in having, my assessment of, is he interested in having a conversation?
Well, he'd
or
like
is
to
he
talk
here
about his cement. No, he'd like to talk about his cement business and want to know if you're a sports fan, and you say you're not. And might say, are you married? Whatever. And
so, are you a sports fan? I know a lot of people that really aren't, but they study it so that they can talk
about it.
And so, for me, I know enough about sports, but I would probably say, well, I like sports, but that's not a keen interest of mine.
Would you? Okay, so let's say you've talked for 15 minutes, and he's done almost all the talking. Would an authentic person say, you're doing all the talking and you're not asking anything about me? I don't like that.
I personally wouldn't do that. Because it goes back to, is that a way that I think will effectively create a connection with him?
Okay.
And so that's a social situation, and I probably would have some mental notes of saying, I'm helping facilitate a conversation. I'm learning a lot about him, and For me, often that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Where I see that coming into play is more when I'm doing coaching in the workplace. So this is a different situation, but I'm going to contrast that with this.
Okay.
And so sometimes in terms of, to be in a workplace, you have to have, some good, effective connection with each other. And oftentimes people are, they have a big blind spot in terms of, they think that was a good conversation. You say, did you notice that they were the other person was totally checked out? Like, really? No, I didn't notice that. And so part of the coaching I do, which is really, I found really challenging at first, is I would notice things that I could realize this other person is totally clueless about.
Wow.
So how do I share that information in a way that says what I'm really noticing, but that says it in a way that they can hear it?
But in the workshop, you have permission. At that lunch, you really don't have permission to give feedback, negative feedback, or what, critical feedback.
Well, it's like, that just feels like that's really not the point.
Right. But
of that.
But it kind of is in the workshops, right, to help people change.
If they're wanting that.
Yeah. Well, isn't that why
they're
there?
wanting that. Not always.
Okay.
Not always. So it might be the Center for Courage and Renewal looks at, how do I bring more of myself to the work that I'm doing in the world? And so sometimes people are hoping for, the self-knowledge can be really hard information to receive. So sometimes there's varying degrees of openness in terms of how much are people ready to hear. So I don't make any presumption that anything's fair game. So a piece of my being authentic with them is to convey enough of who I am as a person, that I've got enough technical skill to be able to discern interaction and what's happening. B, I have enough ability to craft the message so that that person can hear what I'm seeing in a way that actually is constructive and not just destructive.
Okay. Is what you're helping people see, what percentage of the time are you helping them learn how to hear others?
That's a piece of it.
Not, I thought you said that's a big piece. Not
Well,
in terms of being authentic.
It's not only how to hear other people, but it's how do they project themselves into a situation.
Okay, well, let's get to the how-tos. If you're willing, I'd like to take this beyond the business world to life.
Okay.
How do you be an authentic person? What are some of the techniques, tips, whatever? You knew we were going there.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go back to where I started, and that is, how do I know myself?
Good.
How do I know myself? What, from very early on, we pick up cues about what other people expect of me. And, I'll use myself as an example. It's the safest example I can probably give. And so I grew up, my dad was a minister, and so I had a lot of expectations. I grew up with the expectation that I would be essentially a representative of my father. And so how I was reflected on my dad. That's a pretty high expectation.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of my young adult life was learning what I felt about things. What's true about me, what's true about how I could really show up. Because there were a lot of things that, this was okay and that wasn't. And so there's some discernment involved with that in terms of, and there's an up and downside to everything. So those expectations, I learned how to be very gracious.
Mm-hmm.
I learned how to be very open and accepting a lot of people. So there were some gifts to that. But the other piece, and I learned that piece about myself, but there were some other things that I needed to kind of strip away. So what is it that I think you want me to be, and who am I really?
Mm-hmm. Now,
how can I be more consistent?
So is being real or being authentic a matter of stripping away what you learned as a kid and deciding who you really are as an adult, or what your values are, what your...
Well, it is kind of a touching in. For some people, it may be a stripping away. For other people, it all depends on those early influences. So yeah, it's being clear about who am I really? Where am I most comfortable? What are my inclinations? A lot of people say, I know it'd be better if I were more outgoing with people. And yes, it might be easier, but if people are trying to be somebody they're not, it's always kind of an exercise in frustration.
Yeah.
And so how do people learn to communicate who they are in a way that lets people connect more effectively with them? So I might say to people, sometimes I think out loud. And so I may say things that aren't exactly how I want to say it. So just know that about me.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned to have to do that because, again, in an organizational context, when I was running an organization, I would be thinking out loud, and people would think, this is where she wants us to go. And it's like, no, I'm thinking out loud here.
But let's say someone's
does that make
raised
sense?
in a very happy home, loving, accepting parents,
Right.
to put reasonable limits on them, let them know they were okay, and they don't need a shrink when they're 24. Are they going to be authentic just because of that?
Well, I think I was raised in a happy, loving family, and I don't think everybody needs a shrink. I think.
No, they don't. But I'm wondering, these well-adjusted people, are they automatically authentic then?
I think it's always worth. This is me, but and this is part of what I value. But I think it's always worth taking some time to reflect. And it's always worth kind of taking your own temperature to say, am I entering into this in a clean way?
This relationship, this
conversation, this next enterprise, whatever, however I'm moving through the world. And
I know just what you mean, but I don't know that we have the words exactly for what you mean. But I know what you mean.
Yeah, see, I worked really intuitively, and so that's part of the challenge of this.
Okay, let me guess. Tell me if this fits from my hearing. Be honest. Know yourself as you're doing it and does this feel right to you? And have some sense of humility, but know your strengths, but know your human limits. Accept people around you for who they are. Be observant about what you're feeling when you're with them. Have a sense of integrity that comes from being in touch with what you really believe and expressing that and whatever. Is that pretty close? Or what am I missing?
I think the piece I would add to that is it's more than just being honest. It's being honest for what purpose. So I think there are people who sometimes will just say, well, I'm just telling you the truth. I'm just telling you what I see. And it's like they're hammering other people.
Yeah.
And it may
like
be
I hate to say this, but
yeah,
you really messed up yesterday, or whatever. But you don't really hate to say that, or
yeah. If they hated to say it, they probably wouldn't say it.
Right.
So
or, I'm sorry if this gets you angry, but I.
Right. And I think there's a way. I think that's a lot of the coaching work that I end up doing with people is how can you still deliver an honest message, but in a way that is constructive.
Can you give an example?
So somebody can say, like, you're really being a jerk about this, you know. Well, that might be honest, but essentially what I'm communicating, if I said that to you, what I'm communicating to you is I'm done with you. I have no patience with you. Take it or leave it. I don't care. I don't care how this lands. And I'd like to, and I think that's where this authenticity, integrity piece is pretty strongly partnered for me, and it's an important thing for me personally. Is do you really want somebody to know that their behavior is really irritating or not? And so if I wait to the point where I just say, you know, you're being a jerk about this, essentially I'm writing you off. And so sometimes what I'm working with people on is to not wait till they're ready to discount or throw away a relationship. To how do you communicate in ways that give people cues? Because lots of times people say they know they're being a jerk, and they don't always know they're being a jerk. And so it might be to say, you know, I want to talk with you something that's troubled me. You know, I'm really upset by the way you cut me off all the time. And you're taking all the airtime, and I feel like I don't matter to you, or I might as well not even be there. Now that might be some of the things that would lead somebody to say, you're being a jerk. But it's far more helpful.
And it's more integrated with you, because now you're really knowing yourself rather than saying you're a jerk. Here's the things that are upsetting you.
Right. And so it's, A, I'm kind of owning it. B, I'm kind of claiming these are the behaviors that if it were different, we'd have a different connection. And I'm not saying, and I'm done with you, which to me, when I hear you're being a jerk, there's an implied thing is like, I'm ready to just, you know, discount you.
If you were instructing parents how to raise somebody to ensure the highest likelihood that they're a phony, what would you instruct them? Again, I'm using phony as the opposite of
right. I'd say culture trumps everything. I would say look at the dominant messages of the culture.
Culture being the family or the bigger culture?
The larger culture.
Okay.
In society, what is society? You know, how do you want to measure success? Go for the title, go for the money, go for the prestige, go for what makes you look really like you're the most powerful, you're impervious.
Is this
you
men
don't
and women?
need anybody.
Men and women, are we talking, or just men?
I would say that could be for either gender. Okay. And so really a denigration of anything that's unique and precious to that person really says, you know, really it's too bad you're kind of constituted that way, because that doesn't work. You know, you're not going to measure up. I mean, those would be pretty assured ways of encouraging somebody to be phony or not themselves.
That standard success is the way to go, and all your status and worth comes from that success.
Right. And so you want to be a teacher? Why? You could make a lot more money being a CEO of a company.
Right. So for those at this point who are thinking, yeah, I get what you're saying, Barbara, and I know I'm not there. Can you, as we're coming toward an end here, give them an outline of steps to take so that they're more congruent? Is that a fair word, congruent?
Sure. Or more feeling like who they are is, you know, how they choose to bring who they are to, you know, what they do or their interactions. I'd say, you know, think about the times when you really felt like you were in the zone. Like, when did you feel like you really inhabited your own skin? What what was it about those situations that felt like, yeah, that felt comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
That felt like really me.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't trying to impress anybody. It felt like I could communicate really where I was, and it felt good. And, that would be one starting point. Two would be to think about what's really important to me. What do I value the most?
Will you know that, or would it be imposed on you?
I think that's where you're really sitting with that to say, what does matter to me? And so people have very different places where they enter into what brings meaning to their lives, and so what does for people.
But you're saying that as if people know that. They can just think about it. But what if they have all these superimposed values on them that they're heading for?
Well, that's where you would look at that first piece about where did I feel at home, where it felt like it really fit. And so you could look back at those situations and say, did that feel right to me? Did that feel like that was really who I was?
Yeah.
Did I say what I really wanted to say? There are a lot of people who choose to say, well, I couldn't say that because it felt like that would be mean or awful, and so I just didn't say it. And so sometimes there's the error of omission, in terms of I'm not really being who I am because I'm not really sharing myself.
Yeah, but I've learned from you. You want to say those things, but not necessarily when they get to the boiling point. And you want to be able to express them from how you feel versus who they are, your experience.
Right. And so sometimes just saying, well, it's not. So part of authenticity is having the courage to also say what's true for you, but in a way that other people can hear it. So the plus and the minus. Recently I said to somebody who was doing a magnificent job at a large gathering of people, I said, can I give you some feedback? And I watched this guy kind of stiffen. And I said, no. And so he said, yes. And I said, I just wanted to tell you, you are doing a great job the way you're creating this and whatever. And so a piece of that is we always think feedback is just telling people like what's wrong. And so a piece of that and a piece of authenticity is sharing all of that. So when you're delighted with somebody, to have, sometimes that's a more courageous thing to do, to say is like, wow, you did that in a way I never would have the skill to do.
Great upper note to close on. Barbara Hummel, I thank you very much for sharing this, and a lot of food for thought. And I hope you'll join us on the next edition of Insights.